I didn't plan to spend the night out there alone. The forest was only supposed to be a stop on a longer trip. A few hours of fishing, maybe a little hiking. But the sun dipped faster than I expected, and by the time I realized how far I'd wandered, it was already evening. So I set up camp beside a narrow creek, tucked between tall pines that swayed like they had secrets. I'd camped alone before, dozens of times, and I always felt a familiar comfort in the solitude. But that night, from the moment darkness settled, something felt off, like the woods were expecting me. The first strange thing happened around 9:30 p.m. I was sitting by the fire, warming my hands and listening to the crackle, when I heard footsteps. Light, deliberate footsteps, coming from the tree line. Not the quick patter of a squirrel or the heavy thump of a deer. No, these were slow, careful steps, like someone was trying not to be heard. I turned off my lantern so I could see better into the dark. The footsteps stopped. For a solid minute, nothing moved. No wind, no crickets, no rushing water. Just silence, thick and unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. Probably an animal, I whispered to myself, though even I didn't believe it. I stood there listening until the fire burned low. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just tired. The mind does weird things when it's alone in the dark. So I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and tried to sleep. But the quiet outside was too loud. I finally drifted off around midnight. I woke up to whistling, a slow, tuneless whistle, rising and falling, as if someone was wandering just outside my tent. I froze. My first instinct was to check my phone, but it showed no service. The whistling continued. Not melodic, just human. Someone dragging breath through their teeth, almost absently. I grabbed the pocket knife I kept by my sleeping bag and held it tight. I should have called out. Maybe I should have yelled. Maybe I should have made noise to scare off whoever it was. But I didn't. I lay completely still, barely breathing, listening. Then the whistling stopped, and in its place came a whisper. Not words, just the sound of someone exhaling sharply, right next to the thin wall of my tent, like they were leaning in. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly I thought the thing outside would hear it. After maybe a minute, the whispering faded. I don't remember falling back asleep. Only that the next thing I knew, I was blinking awake to the gray-blue light of dawn. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it. But when I stepped outside, I saw footprints. Human footprints, bare footprints. They circled my tent 3 times before leading off into the forest. Daylight didn't help. The forest didn't feel safer in the morning. Everything was too still. Even the birds seemed reluctant to make noise. I packed quickly, telling myself I'd hike back to the trail and leave the woods behind for good. But the forest had other plans. About an hour into the hike, I noticed something odd up ahead. A piece of white fabric hanging from a branch, swaying gently. When I got closer, I realized it was a strip of cloth, the same kind used in tents or sleeping bags. My tent, a perfect slice cut clean from the bottom corner, the corner where my feet had been. And it was tied neatly to the branch, like some kind of marker. It wasn't blowing in the wind. There was no wind. It was swaying, as if someone had just placed it there moments before I arrived. My stomach dropped. I backed away slowly, gripping my backpack straps, listening for anything. Nothing. But the quiet felt like something waiting. I kept moving, trying to stay calm, sticking to the direction I thought the trail was in. But after another mile, the trees became unfamiliar. The slope of the ground felt wrong. And then I found another strip of fabric, this one tied to a low bush, then another, and another, all cut from my tent. They formed a path, leading deeper into the forest. And the worst part? They weren't there the first time I walked this direction. Someone had placed them while I was hiking. 3:17 p.m., the second night. By late afternoon, the sun was sinking again. Every direction looked identical. My compass spun uselessly. My GPS refused to load. And no matter how far I walked, I found those strips of tent fabric, like breadcrumbs laid out by someone who wanted me to follow, or who wanted me lost. By the time it hit dusk, panic had already taken over. I had no choice but to set up camp again. I didn't even bother making a fire. I sat inside my tent, knife in hand, listening to every crack and pop of the forest. Around 9 p.m., the woods went silent again. Then came the footsteps, slow, careful, approaching from behind the tent. I clenched the knife so tight my hand shook. My breathing felt impossibly loud in that suffocating silence. The steps circled me. Once, twice. Then they stopped right beside my head. Something pressed against the tent. A hand. The outline was unmistakable. A palm. 5 long fingers. It slowly dragged across the fabric, tracing the shape of my shoulder, up my neck, to my cheek. I don't know how I stayed silent. Every instinct screamed to run, but the woods outside were worse than the thin nylon between me and whatever was feeling the outline of my face. Then the whispering returned. This time, it was closer. A soft, rhythmic breath directly against the tent wall. I whispered, barely audibly, "What do you want?" The breathing stopped. A single finger pressed where my mouth was, gently, as if shushing me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then, after a long, excruciating minute, the pressure vanished. The footsteps drifted away, and the forest swallowed everything in silence again. I didn't sleep for a second. Morning. Final discovery. I stepped out of the tent the moment the first ray of light appeared, my head pounding from fear and exhaustion. At first glance, nothing looked disturbed. Until I turned around. Behind my tent, carved into the bark of a massive pine, were words. Neat, deliberate letters, etched deep with something sharp. You were almost ready. Below it, carved lower. Tonight we finish. My stomach flipped. Whoever, whatever, had been circling my tent had expected me to stay another night. No chance in hell. Adrenaline took over. I ran. I didn't care what direction. I just ran. Through thorns, over roots, across mud and creek beds. My lungs burned. My legs trembled. But I didn't stop. The forest shifted. The trees thinned. And then, as if I'd stepped through some invisible wall, I stumbled onto a trail, a real trail. One I recognized. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. Even then, before I drove off, I stared at the tree line for a long, tense moment. Nothing moved. But as I pulled away, just before the forest disappeared in my rearview mirror, I swear I saw a figure standing between 2 trees. Tall, motionless, watching, barefoot. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't know who or what it was. A person? A shadow? Something that lives in those woods that doesn't want to be understood? I only know this. I wasn't meant to leave. I wasn't meant to survive 2 nights. And when I sleep, when I manage to sleep at all, I still hear the whistling. Slow, tuneless, drifting through my dreams, waiting for me to come back.